I can still hear the clinking of champagne glasses, the way everyone laughed when Marcus said I was being dramatic. The sound echoes in my mind sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet. But now I'm grateful for that sound, because it was the push I needed to finally walk away. It was supposed to be our engagement party. 200 guests, string lights hanging from the oak trees in his parents' backyard, a catered dinner that cost more than my first car. Everything perfect, everything planned down to the last detail, everything. Except for the way I felt standing there in that champagne-colored dress, smiling until my face hurt. I remember the moment it all fell apart. We were standing by the dessert table. Marcus and his college buddies circled around me like sharks. They'd been drinking since noon, getting louder, meaner, thinking they were hilarious. One of them, Jason, the worst of the bunch, decided to give a toast. But it wasn't really a toast, it was a roast. He started telling stories, story after story, about all the women Marcus had dated before me. The crazy ones, the clingy ones, the one who couldn't take a joke. And everyone laughed. They laughed. Like it was the funniest thing in the world. Like those women weren't real people with real feelings. Then Jason turned to me, grinning, and said, "But don't worry, Rachel. Marcus finally found someone who doesn't mind being the butt of the joke." More laughter, louder this time. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to step in to tell Jason that was enough. But he just shrugged. He actually shrugged and took another sip of his drink. That's when I saw my future flash before my eyes. Every holiday, every family gathering, every birthday party. Just like this. Me standing there, silent, swallowing my hurt while everyone else had their fun. I saw myself at 35, at 40, at 50, still pretending everything was fine. I set my glass down on the table, real slow, real deliberate. My hands were shaking, but I didn't want anyone to see. I excused myself, told everyone I needed to use the restroom. No one noticed when I didn't come back. No one except Marcus's mother, Linda, who found me 15 minutes later in the driveway. I was loading my overnight bag into my car. She stood there with her arms crossed, that tight smile she always wore when she was about to tell me how things should be. "Rachel, honey," she said, voice sweet as poisoned honey. "You're not really leaving, are you? It's just boys being boys. You know how they are." I stopped, turned to face her, and for the first time in the 2 years I'd known this woman, I told her the truth. "Linda," I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "Those boys have been 30 years old for a decade now, and if Marcus thinks humiliating me in front of everyone we know is funny, then I don't want to know what he thinks is serious." Her face went pale, then red. Then she started sputtering about how I was throwing away a good man, a good future, how I'd never find anyone better. I wish I could say I had some perfect comeback, some devastating final line. But I didn't. I just got in my car, started the engine, and drove. I drove for 3 hours straight. No destination, just away. Away from the lights, away from the laughter, away from the life I'd been building that suddenly felt like a prison. My phone started blowing up around hour 2. Marcus, then his mother, then his sister, then Jason, then people I barely even knew. All of them telling me I was overreacting. All of them saying I should come back. The only person who didn't call? Marcus. He texted once. "Everyone's asking where you went. You're embarrassing me." That was it. No apology, no concern, just annoyance that I disrupted his party. I pulled over at a rest stop somewhere off Interstate 95, sat in my car and cried. Not because I was sad about leaving, but because I was relieved. That scared me more than anything. I'd spent 2 years with this man, planned a whole wedding, built a life together. And the strongest emotion I felt driving away was relief. That's when I called her Diane, my old boss from the bookstore I'd worked at in college. I hadn't spoken to her in 3 years, not since I'd quit to take the corporate job that Marcus said would be better for our future. I didn't know if she'd even answer. but she picked up on the second ring. "Rachel." Her voice was surprised but warm. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said, and then everything just poured out. The engagement party, the jokes, the humiliation, the way Marcus had just stood there. She listened to every word without interrupting once. When I finally stopped talking, there was a pause. Then she said, "Where are you right now?" "Some rest stop in, I don't even know. Connecticut, maybe?" "Come to Portland," she said without hesitation. "I have a spare room. Stay as long as you need." "Diane, I can't just—" "Yes, you can," she cut me off gently. "And you should. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to?" I couldn't remember. I truly couldn't remember the last time I'd made a choice based on what I wanted instead of what Marcus wanted or what his family expected. So I said yes. I said yes, and I started driving north. The next few weeks were a blur. I crashed on Diane's couch in her tiny apartment above the bookstore she now owned. She didn't ask me about my plans or when I'd go back. She just let me be. Let me sleep until noon if I needed to. Let me help in the bookstore when I couldn't stand being alone with my thoughts. Let me figure things out at my own pace. Those first mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up disoriented, reaching for my phone out of habit, then remembering there was no morning text from Marcus telling me what our plans were for the day. No schedule to follow, no expectations to meet. The freedom felt terrifying at first, like stepping off a cliff into nothing. But Diane had this way of making everything seem normal. She'd shuffle into the living room in her robe, hand me a cup of coffee and say, "The morning shift starts at 9 if you want something to do, or you can stay in your pajamas all day. Your choice." Your choice. 2 words that felt foreign and precious at the same time. I started working in the bookstore on day 4, not because I had to, but because I needed to do something with my hands, with my mind. Being still meant thinking. And thinking meant replaying that night over and over. So I organized shelves. I learned the register system. I dusted the vintage hardcovers in the rare book section. I lost myself in the work. The regulars started to recognize me. They'd ask if I was new, and I'd say yes, and they'd welcome me with the kind of casual kindness that made my throat tight. These people didn't know me, didn't know my history or my shame or my failures. They just saw someone helping them find books, and that was enough. Marcus kept calling, then texting. Then his mother started calling. I'd watch my phone light up with their names, feel my stomach twist, and then I'd set it down. I didn't owe them my time or my energy or my explanations. That was new for me, that boundary. In my relationship with Marcus, I'd always answered, always explained, always justified my feelings like they needed a defense. His mother's voicemails got progressively nastier. "You're being childish, Rachel." Then, "You're going to regret this." Then, "No one else will want you, you know? You're damaged goods now." I deleted each one without listening all the way through. Then his lawyer sent a letter about the engagement ring, which apparently was a family heirloom and they wanted it back. The letter was cold, formal, threatening legal action if I didn't return it within 10 business days. I stared at it for a long time, that ring sitting heavy on my finger. I'd stopped wearing it the day I left, but I hadn't been ready to take it off completely. Now, reading that lawyer's letter, I twisted it off. It slid easily, like my finger had been waiting for permission to let go. I mailed it back with no note, no explanation, just the ring in a padded envelope. I didn't insure it, didn't add tracking. If they wanted their precious heirloom back so badly they could take their chances with the postal service, I thought that would be the end of it. But Marcus showed up in Portland 3 weeks later. He found the bookstore, walked in like he owned the place, and demanded to talk to me. Diane, bless her heart, told him I wasn't there even though I was literally standing in the back room. I could hear everything through the thin wall. "She's throwing away her whole life," Marcus said, voice tight with frustration. "We were supposed to get married." "Were you?" Diane asked, calm as still water. Because from what I understand, Rachel walked away from a party where she was humiliated, and you never even checked if she made it home safe. That doesn't sound like someone ready to be a husband. That's none of your business. You made it my business when you stormed into my store, Diane said, and I could hear the steel in her voice now. Rachel doesn't want to see you. She doesn't owe you an explanation, and she certainly doesn't owe you a second chance. There was silence. Then footsteps. Then the bell above the door chimed as he left. I came out of the back room, shaking. Diane pulled me into a hug. "You okay?" He didn't even ask if I was okay, I whispered. He just wanted to know why I was ruining his life. I know, honey, I know. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going back to Boston. I wasn't going back to that apartment Marcus and I had shared, to that corporate job I'd hated, to that life I'd built trying to be someone I wasn't. I was staying in Portland. I was starting over. Diane offered me a job at the bookstore. It didn't pay much, nothing like my old salary, but I didn't care. I found a studio apartment 6 blocks away, one room with big windows and creaky floors. I bought used furniture from thrift stores. I learned how to cook actual meals instead of just reheating takeout. I started reading again, really reading, losing myself in stories the way I used to before everything became about productivity and networking and climbing ladders. For the first time in years, I felt like myself, but it wasn't immediate. Healing never is. There were nights I'd lie awake in my studio apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made a mistake, wondering if maybe I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too unwilling to compromise. I started seeing a therapist in month 3. Her name was Dr. Sarah Kim, and she had an office that smelled like lavender. In our first session, I cried for 45 minutes straight, barely able to get words out between sobs. She just handed me tissues and waited. I keep thinking I overreacted, I finally managed. It was just one night, just some stupid jokes. "Tell me," Dr. Kim said gently, "was it really just one night?" And then it all came out. The years of small dismissals, the way Marcus would make decisions without consulting me, then act surprised when I was upset, the way his friends would make jokes at my expense, and he'd laugh along, the way I'd learned to make myself smaller, quieter, more agreeable. "That night wasn't the problem," Dr. Kim said when I finished. "That night was just the moment you finally saw the pattern clearly enough to break it. 6 months passed, then a year, then 2. Marcus stopped calling after the first 6 months. His mother sent one final email telling me I'd regret this decision, that I'd end up alone and miserable. I never responded. I didn't need to. Instead, I built a life. A real life. Not the life someone else wanted for me, not the life that looked good on paper, but the life that felt right in my bones. The bookstore became my sanctuary. Diane taught me everything about running the business, about choosing inventory, about building relationships with the regulars. There was Mrs. Chen, who came in every Tuesday for her mystery novels. There was Daniel, the high school teacher who bought poetry books by the stack. There was Sophie, the college student who studied at our reading corner every afternoon. She reminded me of myself at that age, before I'd learned to dim my light to make others comfortable. These people became my family. They asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. They remembered the small things, like how I took my coffee or that I was allergic to cinnamon. They showed up consistently, without me having to beg or prove I was worth their time. And then there was Owen. He started coming in on Thursdays, always bought something from the local authors section, always had a kind word. He had this way of looking at books like they were treasures, running his fingers along the spines with genuine reverence. It took me 3 months to realize he was coming in to see me as much as the books. The first time we really talked, beyond, "Can I help you find anything?" and "I'll take this one," was on a Thursday afternoon in October. Rain was drumming against the windows, and the store was empty, except for us. He was browsing the poetry section. "Do you have a favorite poet?" he asked suddenly. I looked up. Everyone who works in a bookstore has to have one. He smiled. So? Audre Lorde, I said without hesitation. You know her work. Everyone should know her work. He came over to where I was working. I'm Owen. I teach history at the community college. I come in here to remember that not everything worth knowing is in textbooks. That became our routine. Thursday afternoons, rain or shine, Owen would come in. We'd talk about books, about life, about nothing in particular. He never asked about my past, never pushed. He just showed up. Week after week, he asked me to coffee one rainy Thursday afternoon. Just coffee, no pressure, at the cafe 2 doors down. I almost said no, almost told him I wasn't ready. But then I remembered what Diane had told me when I first arrived. You get to choose what comes next, Rachel. You get to choose all of it. So I said yes. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks around the city, the kind where you talk so much you don't notice you've walked 5 miles. Long walks turned into nights spent talking until 3 in the morning about everything and nothing. Owen told me about his divorce, how he'd spent 2 years rebuilding himself before he felt ready to try again. I told him about the engagement party, about driving away, about learning to trust myself again. He listened when I talked. Actually listened, not just waited for his turn to speak. He asked questions that showed he was paying attention. He remembered the small details I mentioned in passing, and when I had bad days when the doubt crept back in, he didn't try to fix me or tell me I was being ridiculous. He just said, "That sounds really hard," and sat with me in it. Owen was patient, never pushed, never demanded more than I was ready to give. Our first kiss happened 3 months into dating, on my tiny apartment balcony under string lights I'd hung myself. It was gentle, tentative, like he was asking permission, even as it happened. He didn't try to fix me or save me. He just saw me, all of me. The parts that were scared, the parts that were angry, the parts that were still healing, and he stayed anyway. 3 years after I'd driven away from that engagement party, I was standing in Diane's bookstore on a Sunday afternoon, unpacking a shipment of new releases. The bell above the door chimed. I looked up, expecting Owen, but it was Marcus. He looked different, older, tired. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain for maybe the first time in his life. "Rachel," he said. "Just my name, nothing else." I set down the book I was holding. "Marcus, can we talk?" I glanced at Diane, who was watching from behind the register, ready to throw him out if I gave the word, but I shook my head slightly. "It's okay," I told her. Then to Marcus, "We can talk, but not here. There's a park down the street." We walked in silence to the small park with the duck pond, found a bench, sat down with 2 feet of space between us. "I've been in therapy," Marcus said after a long pause. "For about a year now, working through a lot of things." "That's good," I said, meaning it. I came to apologize. He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine regret. For that night. For everything. "You were right to leave. I was so focused on what everyone else thought, on looking good, on being the life of the party. I never saw what it was doing to you. I never saw how much I was hurting you." I took a breath. "Thank you for saying that. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not asking for that. I needed you to know that you weren't wrong. You weren't dramatic or sensitive or any of the things my mother called you. You were right, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." We sat there for a while, watching the ducks glide across the pond. It was strange, being here with him, feeling nothing. No anger, no hurt, no longing, just a quiet sense of closure. "I'm getting married," he said eventually. "In the fall, to someone named Angela. She's good for me. Calls me out when I'm being an idiot. Doesn't let me hide behind jokes." "I'm happy for you," I said, and I meant it. Are you happy?" he asked. I thought about my tiny apartment with the creaky floors, about the bookstore that smelled like paper and coffee, about Diane, who'd become more of a family than my own, about Owen, who was probably at home right now making dinner, knowing I'd be tired after a long day, about the life I'd built from nothing, the life that was entirely, completely mine. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Yeah, I really am." Marcus nodded. "Good. You deserve that." He stood up, brushed off his jeans. "I should go. Thank you for talking to me." "Marcus," I called as he started to walk away. He turned back. That night, when I left, it was the scariest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the best decision I ever made. He gave me a sad smile. "I know. I'm glad you did it, Rachel. I'm glad you saved yourself." And then he was gone, walking back down the path toward the parking lot. I sat there a little longer, watching the sunlight dance on the water, feeling the weight of the past finally lift from my shoulders. When I got back to the bookstore, Owen was there, leaning against the counter talking to Diane about some rare book he'd found at an estate sale. He looked up when I walked in, and his whole face lit up. That's what love looks like, I thought. Someone whose face lights up just because you walked into a room. "Hey," he said, coming over to kiss my forehead. "How'd it go?" "Good," I said, taking his hand. "Really good, I think I'm finally done looking back." That night, after we'd closed the store and Diane had gone home, Owen and I sat in the reading corner with cups of tea. He had his arm around me and I had my head on his shoulder, and everything felt right. "You know what's funny?" I said. "What?" 5 years ago, I thought my life was over when I drove away from that party. I thought I'd lost everything. But really? I just lost everything that was wrong for me, everything that came after. All of this. This is what I was supposed to find. Owen kissed the top of my head. "You didn't just find it, Rachel. You built it. You built this whole life from scratch. That takes courage." "It took desperation," I corrected with a laugh. "Sometimes they're the same thing." I thought about that, about how desperation can look like courage from the outside, about how leaving can look like losing when really it's winning, about how the scariest moments in our lives can become the doorways to our best ones. "I'm glad I got in that car," I said softly. "I'm glad I drove away." "So am I," Owen said. "Because if you hadn't, we never would have found each other." And he was right. If I'd stayed, if I'd swallowed my hurt one more time, if I'd walked back into that party and pretended everything was fine, I'd have missed all of this. The bookstore, the tiny apartment, the late-night conversations, the quiet joy of a life that belonged only to me. Sometimes the best thing you can do is leave. Sometimes walking away isn't giving up. It's giving yourself a chance. I used to think that night was the worst night of my life. Now I know it was the beginning of my real life, the life I was always meant to live, the life I chose for myself, and I wouldn't change a single thing.